Hello everyone, and welcome to Sherlock Tales, where mysteries unfold. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Now close your eyes and listen to the Ashbourne riddle. It was a dreary October morning when I was roused from my slumber by the unmistakable clatter of boots in the hallway of 221B Baker Street. Holmes, already fully dressed and in one of his moods of intense focus, stood over me with a telegram in hand. "Watson," he said crisply, "we have been summoned to Derbyshire. A murder, most peculiar. The body of a prominent judge has been found dead in the gardens of his estate, and the local constabulary has requested my involvement." Still groggy, I sat up. "A judge, you say?" "Judge Ambrose Ashbourne, retired 2 years ago, yet still a man of influence. His body was discovered this morning under mysterious circumstances by his groundskeeper. Inspector Hargrove of the Derbyshire Constabulary is perplexed." "Very well," I replied, throwing off my blanket. "I suppose we must once more venture into the provinces." By noon we were aboard the train north, the clouds thickening overhead like a curtain lowering upon the stage. Holmes spent much of the journey examining a dossier sent ahead by the inspector. It contained little more than the basic facts. The judge's body had been found in his topiary garden, beneath a marble sundial. No visible wound, no signs of struggle. The strangest murders, Holmes mused, are often the most revealing. When the apparent cause is absent, the true cause may be ingenious. We arrived at Ashbourne Manor just past 5 o'clock. The estate was a stately Georgian edifice perched upon a wooded rise, its windows flickering with a warm glow of oil lamps as dusk descended. The gardens, even in autumn, were immaculate. Rows of box hedges trimmed to perfection, topiary creatures frozen in motion. Inspector Hargrove greeted us at the gate, a robust man with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much and understood too little. He led us directly to the crime scene. The garden was deathly still. "He was found right there," the inspector said, pointing to the base of the sundial. "Laid out like a man asleep, hands crossed over his chest. But there's not a mark on him. No blood, no bruising, nothing." Holmes approached slowly, his eyes drinking in every detail. The body had not yet been moved. Judge Ashbourne lay in his dressing gown and slippers, his white hair meticulously combed, his face serene. Yet something about the scene was off. Not merely the body's placement, but the overwhelming stillness. Holmes dropped to his haunches and examined the sundial's base. "Watson, your lens, if you please." I handed him my magnifier, and he inspected the narrow seam between the sundial pedestal and the paving stones beneath it. "Aha," he murmured. "Very fine indeed." He turned to Hargrove. "Have any footprints been found nearby?" The inspector nodded. "Only one set, Ashbourne's, leading from the house to the garden." "No others? No staff?" "None. It rained last night. The ground is soft enough to reveal any recent passage. Only the judge walked here." Holmes stood slowly, his eyes scanning the periphery. "Then our killer is either a phantom or a man of uncommon subtlety. Tell me, has anyone entered or exited the manor since the discovery?" "No one," Hargrove replied firmly. "We've kept it sealed. The judge's family's inside, the daughter, her fiancé, and an old friend of the judge's who was staying the night." "Then we must speak to them. But first, Watson, what do you observe about the body?" I examined it closely. No wounds, no signs of a struggle. Pupils slightly dilated, lips tinged slightly blue. "Precisely," Holmes said. a silent death. He knelt beside the body again and gently lifted the edge of the judge's sleeve. There, see it? Barely visible, a small puncture mark, no larger than a pinhead on the inner arm. Poison? I asked. Almost certainly, Holmes replied, but not any common compound. This was administered with precision and planning. The question is, how? Hargrove cleared his throat. We checked his study. No suicide note, no glass of wine or tea, nothing disturbed. Then let us interview the household, Holmes said, before the truth slips any further into the shadows. Ashbourne Manor's drawing room was grand, its mahogany panelling and velvet drapes exuding a heavy ancestral dignity. Holmes and I were ushered in by Inspector Hargrove, where 3 individuals waited, the judge's immediate circle, each bearing the freshly weathered expressions of grief, suspicion, or fear. Holmes, standing beside the marble hearth, observed them silently for a moment, before speaking. Let us begin with names and relationships, if you please. The first to respond was a woman in her mid-30s, elegantly dressed in black crepe. Her face was pale, and though she held a handkerchief delicately in one hand, her eyes were dry. I am Evelyn Ashbourne, his daughter. Holmes bowed slightly. Miss Ashbourne, and you, sir? A tall man with a well-groomed moustache and a stiff bearing stepped forward. Captain Philip Armitage, her fiancé. And the third? The last figure was a man of about 60, portly, his suit rumpled and his collar askew. His eyes were red, and a faint smell of whiskey clung to his clothes. Leonard Pike, he said hoarsely, old friend of the judge. We were at Oxford together. Holmes began gently but precisely. Miss Ashbourne, may I ask when you last saw your father alive? Last evening after dinner, around 9:30. He said he was retiring to his study. He often took long walks in the garden before bed. Did he seem agitated? Disturbed? She hesitated. Not outwardly, but I had the impression he had been troubled lately, distracted. He had received a letter earlier in the day. He didn't speak of it, but he went pale when he read it. Where's the letter now? I don't know. Perhaps still in his study? Holmes turned to Armitage. Captain, did you see the judge last night? Yes, briefly. I went to the study just before 10 to fetch a book. He was seated at his desk writing something in his journal. He seemed curt, not rude, just terse. And you, Mr. Pike? The older man fidgeted. We played a few hands of whist before supper. After that, I retired early. I've had a lingering cough. Didn't see him again. Very good, Holmes said. And now tell me, was there anyone else on the estate last night? A housekeeper? Servants? Miss Ashbourne shook her head. Only Mrs. Durley, the cook, and she retired early. No one comes to the house without passing the gate lodge. The groundskeeper lives there. I shall speak to him next, Holmes said. For now, Watson, the study. We made our way down the west corridor to the judge's private study. The room was a sanctuary of order, tall bookshelves, an oak desk, and an arched window that overlooked the topiary garden. Holmes moved quickly, his eyes flicking across the surfaces like a hawk. The letter, he said. It was not discarded, it was hidden. He opened the desk drawer and slid his fingers beneath the false bottom, revealing a single envelope. The paper was thick, unmarked, save for one short line typed in block letters. You will pay for what you did in 1869. Holmes's face became very still. What happened in 1869, I wonder? He turned to the judge's journal. The last entry was dated the previous night. I saw him again. The scar is unmistakable. He knows. I fear it may be too late to undo what was done. "Watson," Holmes murmured, "this murder is no crime of passion or convenience. This is retribution, carefully planned and coldly executed. Someone from the judge's past has returned." A soft knock at the study door interrupted us. Inspector Hargrove stepped in with a grave expression. "We've just received a report from the village constable," he said. "One of the groundskeeper's dogs unearthed something buried behind the hedge maze." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we must see it. Now." We followed Hargrove outside, the cold air biting. Beyond the hedgerows, a constable stood beside a freshly turned patch of soil. Within the shallow grave was a tin strong-box, rusted at the hinges. Holmes pried it open. Inside were old documents, court records, newspaper clippings, and a faded photograph of 5 young men in barristers' robes. Scrawled across the photograph in fresh ink were 4 words: "Ashbourne, judgment comes now." Back inside the manor, Holmes laid the rusted box's contents on the study desk, methodically examining each one. The photograph, 5 young men in formal barristers' robes, likely from the late 1860s, had yellowed with time, but the eyes of each man stared outward, frozen in confidence or defiance. One of them was unmistakably a much younger Ambrose Ashbourne. Another bore a jagged scar across his cheek, barely visible in the faded image. Holmes tapped the face of the scarred man. "This," he said, "must be the spectre from Ashbourne's journal. The man he feared had returned." I peered over his shoulder. "And the other 3? We must identify them all, but first we focus on 1869. The threat in the letter was clear." He turned to the records within the box. Most were legal briefs and court transcripts from nearly 3 decades prior, all centered around a single trial, the Crown versus Elijah Stannard, 1869. "Elijah Stannard," Holmes murmured, "convicted of murder and hanged. It appears Ashbourne served as junior counsel for the prosecution." "And the others?" I asked. Holmes scanned the names. 2 barristers for the prosecution, 1 for the defence. All were members of the Temple Bar Circle, an informal society of rising legal minds in the late 60s. And here, Stannard's counsel, Robert Clenham. He lifted the photograph again, comparing the faces to a portrait clipped from a legal journal. "This is Clenham here, the man with the scar." "Stannard was hanged," I said slowly. "So why would his defence counsel threaten Ashbourne?" Holmes gave a tight nod. "Because something went wrong, and Clenham, it seems, has returned." Inspector Hargrove entered then, bearing a thick folder. We retrieved court records from the Derby archives, full transcripts of the Stannard trial. Holmes flipped through them rapidly, eyes dancing over the lines, then he stopped. "Listen to this, Watson. Defence witness testimony dismissed by the bench due to procedural error. Physical evidence submitted late was deemed inadmissible. Prosecution asserted direct motive through witness affidavits, later sealed from public record." Curious. Could the judge have buried a miscarriage of justice? Possibly. And if Stannard was innocent... Holmes did not finish the sentence, but the weight of it hung heavy in the air. We returned to the drawing room, where Miss Ashbourne, Captain Armitage, and Leonard Pike still waited. Holmes turned to them, expression now sharpened with resolve. "Miss Ashbourne, did your father ever mention the name Robert Clenham?" She frowned. "Number. But he did receive a visitor last month, a man with a pronounced limp and a scar. He refused to give his name, and my father seemed shaken." "Did this visitor stay the night?" "Number he left after an hour." Holmes nodded slowly. "And Mr. Pike?" You studied with the judge? Yes, we were at Balliol together. Did you know him in 1869? The man hesitated. Yes, I was practicing law then, though not involved in the Stannard trial. Holmes stepped closer. Did Ashbourne ever speak of the trial? Pike's brow furrowed. Once. He said it was the case that made him, and nearly unmade him. Holmes moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. He feared a reckoning, and it arrived. The man who visited him last month was Clennam. I believe he has spent the past 30 years reconstructing the case, tracking each man involved. And now he seeks justice. Or revenge. Do you think he's here? I asked. I think he never left Derbyshire. Just then a constable entered, out of breath. Inspector, sir, there's been a break-in. The local apothecary. Someone smashed a window, took nothing but a vial of digitalin and a hypodermic syringe. Holmes's eyes met mine. The same method used on Judge Ashbourne. He turned sharply to Hargrove. Send men to the village inn, interview all guests. Anyone matching Clennam's description must be found. If he has struck once, he will strike again. The second victim may already be within this house. Holmes was in motion the instant the word digitalin was confirmed. It's a cunning poison, he said briskly as we crossed the hall to the stairs. Tasteless, odourless, and quick when injected. The same substance used on Judge Ashbourne, I am certain. Clennam is escalating. The household was now under full constabulary lockdown. All servants were interviewed. The cook, Mrs. Durley, confirmed that she had seen a strange figure peering from the woods 2 nights earlier. A man with a long coat and a heavy gait. She assumed it was one of the poachers, but in hindsight she realized the figure moved like someone partially lame. Holmes and I returned to the drawing room to re-interview the remaining guests. Mr. Pike, Holmes said suddenly, fixing him with a hawk's gaze, you were at the bar during the Stannard case. Did you testify? The old man shifted, uncomfortable. Number I was not called. But you knew the man. Elijah Stannard? Slightly. He was brilliant, erratic. His trial was a sensation. And did you believe him guilty? Pike took a long breath. At the time, yes. The evidence was strong, but there were rumours. Rumours? That the prosecution suppressed evidence. That the witness who placed Stannard at the scene had reason to lie. Ashbourne wouldn't discuss it. Holmes nodded, the gears turning rapidly behind his sharp features. I believe Clennam was convinced that Ashbourne, and possibly the others involved, orchestrated a deliberate miscarriage of justice. He turned to Evelyn. Miss Ashbourne, did your father keep personal correspondence? He had a locked cabinet in the library, she replied. But I don't have the key. Then we must open it. Holmes and I followed her to the library, where the cabinet stood tall against the far wall. He produced a set of thin steel tools and picked the lock in under a minute. Inside were bundles of letters, legal briefs and diaries. Holmes dug until he produced a thick envelope marked R. Clennam, returned unopened. He opened it. Inside was a letter, unsent but damning. Robert, I've carried the weight of our silence for 30 years. I knew Stannard was innocent. I knew the evidence you attempted to submit would exonerate him. But we were pressured by men higher than either of us. We were told it would protect the integrity of the bench. I believed it then. I regret it now. I write not to ask forgiveness, but to give you truth before time takes me too. That's motive enough for murder, I said. No, Holmes replied, it's motive for revenge. This isn't just about Ashbourne. Clennam is finishing what he believes is a righteous purge. We must act quickly. Just then, a scream echoed through the house. We ran toward it and found Captain Armitage at the top of the stairs, pale and gasping. "She's in her room, Evelyn," she collapsed. We rushed to her. She lay on the carpet, unconscious, her pulse faint but present. Holmes immediately examined her arm. "Here," he said grimly, pointing to a nearly invisible puncture mark near her shoulder. Digitalin again, but the dose was smaller, deliberate. Watson administered atropine from his bag. We waited, breathless, until Evelyn stirred. Holmes looked down at her. "Who was it?" I don't know," she whispered. "I woke in the dark and felt a sting. I saw no one." Holmes rose, fists clenched. "He's taunting us, warning us." A constable ran in moments later. "Sir, we found something. A room in the gatehouse has been disturbed." Holmes and I followed them to the old groundskeeper's lodge, long unused. Inside, dust had been disturbed across the floor. Footprints. A cot had been set up. A journal lay on a rickety table. Holmes flipped it open. Inside, in tight, slanting letters, "He must die as Stannard died, in silence. The daughter shall live to remember. The others shall confess. Let judgment fall." Holmes's jaw tightened. We are dealing with a man who believes himself executioner. His next act will be bolder. The only question is who he believes is next. That night, Ashbourne Manor did not sleep. Every corridor held the rustle of footfalls. Every creaking timber might have been the harbinger of death. Evelyn, now recovered but shaken, was placed under constant watch. Holmes remained restless, pacing the length of the manor, his mind evidently constructing traps within traps. "This is no longer just a case of who," he said to me under his breath as we stood before the drawing-room hearth, "but of when and where. Clennam isn't hiding, he's circling, and he will strike at the moment of greatest theatricality. That is the mark of a man who believes his vengeance to be sacred." Shortly past midnight, a knock echoed through the front hall. We opened the door to find a man slumped against the frame, old, ragged, his coat torn and splattered with rain. His face was pale as bone, and though age had weathered him, the unmistakable scar on his cheek shone beneath the porch light. Robert Clennam. He didn't resist as we pulled him inside. He collapsed into a chair by the hearth, shivering. Hargrove arrived shortly after, and for the first time we all beheld the man who had haunted the corners of the Ashbourne case. "I came to finish it," Clennam muttered, staring into the flames. "But I couldn't bring myself to take her life." Holmes sat across from him, studying him not as a criminal, but as a broken instrument of truth. "You wanted justice for Elijah Stannard." "Stannard was innocent," Clennam spat. "He was a hothead, but he didn't kill that girl. They used him. They needed someone to hang to calm the public. Ashbourne, Brelling, the others. They knew it. They shut me out when I tried to appeal." "Who were the others?" Clennam's fingers twitched. "Judge Gregory Brelling, Solicitor Edward Ferndale, Prosecutor David Stowe. All of them signed the order to dismiss the evidence. I kept the original letter from the witness. They said it was inadmissible, but it proved Stannard wasn't there that night." Holmes leaned forward. "And where are the others now?" "Brelling died years ago. Ferndale, he's alive. So is Stowe, but they're ghosts now. Ashbourne was the last one with a reputation still worth something." "You killed him?" Clennam was silent for a long moment. Then, "Yes. I watched from the hedges until he came out. I injected him as he passed near the sundial. No struggle. He barely felt it. Just as Stannard died, unaware of what had been done to him. "And Evelyn?" I asked. "She was never meant to die. I needed her to see, to remember. I didn't expect her to find the envelope." Holmes gestured to the documents we had recovered. "You buried the strongbox to be found." "I wanted someone to look, to ask why. I'd been waiting for years in the shadows. I was prepared to kill them all one by one, but it never made me feel better. Not after I saw her face." Holmes turned to Hargrove. "You'll place him under arrest, but treat him gently. He is not insane, only ruined." Clennam made no protest as he was led away. At the door, he turned. "Do with me what you must. Just don't let the world forget Stannard." We stood in silence as the door shut behind him. The manor, still cold with the memory of murder, felt oddly lighter. A weight had shifted. In the early hours of the morning, Holmes returned to the study where he sealed the documents in a fresh envelope marked for the Home Office. As he handed it to me, he said softly, "There will be inquiries, perhaps even apologies, but there will be no true justice. Stannard is still dead, and Clennam is hollow." I nodded. "And Evelyn? She will carry the truth. That is its own burden, and perhaps its own redemption." Though Robert Clennam had confessed, Holmes remained unsatisfied. That much was clear the moment he refused tea the next morning, and instead unrolled the Stannard case records once more across the library desk. "Something still offends me, Watson," he murmured, tapping his fingers along the margin of the deposition transcript. "Clennam's story is tragic, yes, sincere, perhaps, but truthful in full? No. But he confessed, and the method aligns perfectly with what we found." "Yes," Holmes replied, "which is precisely the problem. It's too perfect." Holmes extracted a particular page from the file. "This is the affidavit submitted by a Mrs. Ellen Merton, a laundress who claimed she saw Stannard outside Miss Chamberlain's flat the night she was killed. This was the evidence Clennam insisted was wrongly dismissed." He pointed to the margin of the affidavit. A tiny note, hastily scrawled, "Witness withdrew under duress." "Duress," Holmes repeated. "From whom?" I leaned in. "Ashbourne's colleagues? The prosecution?" "Exactly. Let us consider the possibility that Ashbourne did not act alone, nor Clennam. If so, who else might still be playing a part in this tragedy?" Before I could answer, a knock came at the door. A constable entered, his cap in hand. "Inspector Hargrove request your presence at the station. Something's happened. With Clennam." We arrived within the hour. In the station's lower cells, Clennam lay on his cot, pale and unmoving. Holmes checked his pulse. It was faint but present. "Drugged," Holmes muttered. "Opium or laudanum. Get a doctor, quickly." A bottle was found beneath Clennam's bedding, unmarked but half empty. Hargrove frowned. "Suicide?" Holmes shook his head. "Clennam came to us of his own volition. His confession was dramatic, yes, but sincere. He wasn't finished. He hadn't yet told us everything." That evening, while Clennam recovered under watch, Holmes returned to Ashbourne Manor. He gathered Evelyn, Pike, and Captain Armitage in the drawing-room. "I have a question," he said. "One final thread to pull. Miss Ashbourne, your fiancé, Captain Armitage, where did you meet him?" She blinked, caught off guard. "At a recital in London last year. He had recently returned from India." Holmes turned to Armitage. "Indeed, and your regiment?" 15th Lancers, Bengal Detachment." "Your record?" "Honourable discharge, malaria." Holmes gave a faint smile. "You're lying." Armitage stiffened. I beg your pardon? Forgive me, Captain, but your story is riddled with inconsistencies. There is no record of a Philip Armitage in the 15th Lancers, nor in any Bengal regiment during the past 5 years. The room fell utterly silent. Evelyn turned toward him, stunned. Philip? Holmes continued, calm but relentless. You met Evelyn under false pretenses. You inserted yourself into this household. You gained the judge's trust, and when he refused to support your marriage, you killed him. Armitage laughed hollowly. You think I'm Clennam's accomplice? I think you are the man Clennam was protecting, the second actor in this drama. Holmes pulled from his coat the returned letter, the one Ashbourne had never sent. He refers to Clennam's warnings. To a they. He feared exposure, not by one man, but by two. Holmes turned to Pike. Tell me, Mr. Pike, have you ever met Captain Armitage before this year? Pike shook his head, still dazed. But Clennam has. And then it came, slowly, quietly, a shift in Armitage's face. The stiff mask dropped, and behind it, cunning. You are always too clever for your own good, he said, his voice a shade darker. Evelyn drew back from him in horror. Who are you? My name is not Armitage. My name is Henry Stannard, Elijah Stannard's son. Stannard, Holmes whispered, as if tasting the name. Of course. Henry Stannard, formerly Armitage, stood with a strange calm in the centre of the drawing-room. Evelyn, white-faced, had moved far from his side, as though she no longer recognized the man she once loved. Pike sat stunned in his chair while I stood ready, unsure whether to reach for my revolver. Holmes, however, looked almost satisfied. Your resemblance to Elijah is subtle, he said, but it's there, the line of the jaw, the manner of your voice. You inherited more than your father's name. Henry nodded slowly, his voice quiet but clear. He was hanged when I was 7. The name Stannard became poison. My mother changed it when we fled north. She never spoke of him again. But I remembered. I remembered the shame. I remembered the whispers. And when she died, I began to seek the truth. You found Clennam, Holmes said. In Belfast. He was speaking at a legal forum. I waited, confronted him after, showed him my father's execution record and the newspaper clippings. He wept. Then he told me everything. So, I said carefully, you planned revenge together? At first we wanted only answers. We travelled together, traced the names. Brelling was dead. Ferndale was ill and couldn't speak. Then we came to Ashbourne, the last man who still pretended the trial was just. Holmes interjected, but Clennam's intention was to expose them, not to kill. Henry's eyes narrowed. That was Clennam's weakness. He wanted justice through confession. I wanted justice through retribution. You murdered Judge Ashbourne, Holmes said. Yes, I waited until he came into the garden. Clennam made the compound. I used it. Quiet, painless. My father deserved neither the gallows nor the shame that followed. I gave Ashbourne both. And then Evelyn? Holmes asked. Was she always part of your plan? Henry hesitated, the only time he did. She was unexpected. I didn't mean to fall in love with her. That was never the intention. But once I did, the rest of it blurred. Evelyn's voice was a whisper. Was anything you told me true? He turned toward her. Yes, that I loved you. But you poisoned me. I meant only to warn you, a dose to frighten, not to harm. Holmes spoke now with solemn gravity. So you would let the sins of the fathers cascade upon the daughters? That is not justice. That is vengeance without discipline. I did what the courts never did, Henry growled. I passed sentence. And now, Holmes said, what sentence do you expect from the courts? Henry looked at Evelyn one last time. The one they gave my father. He stepped forward and calmly placed his hands before him. Hargrove, having silently entered during the confession, emerged from the shadows. Take him, Holmes said simply. As they led Henry Stannard from the room, Holmes turned to Evelyn. I am truly sorry, he said gently. She stared at the door for a long moment. I thought I understood grief, she whispered, but now I know it has layers, and none of them are simple. Later, back at Baker Street, Holmes sat silent in his chair for over an hour, puffing on his pipe. At last, he spoke. He was right, Watson, in one regard, which is, the courts did fail, but writing that failure with murder creates only more widows. This case will echo for generations. 3 days passed in a haze of paperwork, statements, and silent reflection. Henry Stannard's arrest made the front pages of every London paper. Murder avenges murder. Son of the condemned strikes from the shadows. Yet Holmes remained oddly still through it all, brooding in the dim haze of our sitting room, refusing all but the occasional cup of tea and the Morning Post. Watson, he said at last, placing down his pipe with a click, I cannot rest. I looked up from the paper. Because of the Stannard affair? Yes, and no. He rose. I thought the matter settled, but it is not. Not entirely. There is something missing. Some final piece. Overlooked. I keep returning to the photograph in the box. There were 5 men. Ashbourne, Clenham, Stowe, Brelling, and one more. Ferndale? Number Ferndale was a solicitor, never in chambers with the others, but the 5th man in the photo was younger, almost a clerk, barely more than a boy. Holmes retrieved the photograph from his files and pointed at the face. There, look, that man was never identified in any documents we recovered, and yet he's placed among barristers. He turned sharply. We must go to Ashbourne Manor one last time. We arrived the next afternoon. The house, now draped in silence and mourning, greeted us like a mausoleum. Evelyn had left for London. Only the staff remained. Holmes moved directly to the judge's private chambers and, after instructing the staff to leave us undisturbed, knelt beside the old oak wardrobe. This floorboard, he said. Look, it's newer than the others. He produced a chisel and began to pry. Beneath the plank was a small black box, lacquered and sealed with a lock. Inside, letters, bound with a red ribbon, their seals broken and yellow with age. Holmes opened the topmost and read aloud. He turned sharply. We must go to Ashbourne Manor one last time. We arrived the next afternoon. The house, now draped in silence and mourning, greeted us like a mausoleum. Evelyn had left for London. Only the staff remained. Holmes moved directly to the judge's private chambers and, after instructing the staff to leave us undisturbed, knelt beside the old oak wardrobe. This floorboard, he said. Look, it's newer than the others. He produced a chisel and began to pry. Beneath the plank was a small black box, lacquered and sealed with a lock. Inside, letters, bound with a red ribbon, their seals broken and yellow with age. To A, from C.W., March 1870. I write to you again in terror. Stannard's boy was seen at the graveside. He will ask questions as I warned, but worse, Clenham has written to the press. If this continues, everything will come to light. Burn this after reading. C.W., Holmes muttered. Who is C.W.? Another letter from a later date. Brelling believes we acted justly, but I know better. It was not justice, it was theatre. That poor man died because the witness was silenced, and we were too frightened to speak. Ashbourne refuses to act. If we are damned together. Below the letters was a small envelope addressed to E. Ashbourne. Holmes did not open it, but held it reverently. These were never meant to be seen, and yet here they are. He turned the envelope over. The seal was imprinted with a symbol, a circle of scales. Holmes froze. "Watson," he said, voice grave, "this symbol. It's the mark of a secret society of legal elites from the 1860s. The scales of verity, rumoured to have interfered with at least 3 high-profile cases. Do you think they suppressed the evidence in the Stannard trial? I think they did more than that. I think they created a scapegoat, and they knew precisely what they were doing." He replaced the letters, resealed the box, and stood. "The truth is deeper than we thought, and darker. Clennam and Henry believed themselves agents of justice, but they never knew the full story." "And now?" I asked. "Now?" Holmes sighed. "Now we let the secrets remain buried, or risk bringing the past roaring back to life." Though Holmes had declared the matter closed, his mind was evidently unresolved. The discovery of the letters and the mysterious 5th figure in the photograph tugged at his reasoning, like a thread caught in a seam. 2 mornings later I found him at the breakfast table with no plate, no tea, just a magnifying glass, the old photograph, and a blotting pad. He looked up. "I've identified the 5th man." I set down the newspaper. "You have?" "His name is Crispin Wetherell, junior clerk under David Stowe, later became a legal advisor to the Lord Chancellor's office. Disappeared from public life in 1873. No obituary, no burial record." Could he still be alive? Holmes narrowed his eyes. "If he were, he'd be over 80. But I believe he may have gone into hiding, under a new name." He stood abruptly. "We are going to visit the Inner Temple." The Inner Temple, seat of many of London's legal minds, had changed little since Holmes's youth. In the archives, among dust-laden ledgers and curled parchments, we found what we needed: a transfer of property in 1874, Crispin Wetherell, beneficiary of a sealed endowment, withdrawing from legal practice and purchasing a cottage in Dorking under the name Charles Whitlow. Holmes smiled faintly. "Whitlow, a simple mask. Let us see if the mask still breathes." We arrived in Dorking that evening. The address led us to a weathered stone cottage near the edge of a forest, ivy curling across its roof. An elderly housekeeper answered our knock and confirmed that Mr. Whitlow still lived, but rarely spoke. Holmes requested 5 minutes. She hesitated, then nodded. The sitting room was Spartan but dignified. A fire burned low, and a man sat in a high-back chair, wrapped in a wool blanket. His eyes, though milky with age, still carried a flicker of sharpness. "Mr. Wetherell," Holmes said softly, "we know who you are." The old man's lips curled into something between a smile and a wince. "You're the detective," he rasped. "Holmes." "I am." "Then it's all come undone." Holmes knelt beside him. "We know Stannard was innocent. We know Ashbourne, Brelling, and Stowe conspired to convict him. But you were the witness who could have prevented it, weren't you?" Wetherell closed his eyes. "I was. I saw the real killer, a constable. He was in love with the girl. She rejected him. I saw him leaving the flat bloody. I went to Stowe. He said he'd handle it. Next thing I knew, I was being paid to leave London. They told me I'd be protected if I stayed quiet. And you did, Holmes said coldly. I was 23, the old man whispered. What would you have done? Holmes didn't answer. After a moment he stood and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. You've lived with this for nearly 50 years. And for what? Silence bought with fear. Wetherell gave a weak nod. I wrote letters, confessions, but I never mailed them. Give them to me, Holmes said. Let the truth be known, finally. The old man reached with trembling fingers to a drawer and withdrew a small stack of envelopes. Holmes accepted them without a word. As we returned to Baker Street, he said quietly, This closes the loop. The trial, the cover-up, the vengeance. All of it began and ended with silence. And now? I asked. Now we speak. The following week was a storm of correspondence and consequences. Holmes drafted a full report of the Stannard case, attaching Wetherell's letters, Clennam's journal, and the sealed documents recovered from Ashbourne's study. It was sent not to Scotland Yard, but to the Lord Chancellor himself. Let the truth be acknowledged by the very institution that tried to bury it, Holmes said, sealing the envelope with wax. Let the wound be examined, not covered. The newspapers soon picked up whispers. Legal Ghosts of 1869 Reawakened read one headline. Detective Holmes exposes forgotten trial scandal blared another. Yet Holmes refused every interview, made no public comment, and instead turned inward, sitting for hours by the fire in contemplation. One morning, a modest letter arrived addressed to Holmes. He opened it without haste, then passed it to me. To Mr. Holmes, your revelations have brought shame where it was long overdue. I was one of the names in your file. I did not act when I could have. I do not expect forgiveness. Only that I may die knowing someone still believes truth is worth the cost. E.F. Edward Ferndale, I said quietly. Still alive, after all. Holmes nodded, and haunted. But not all responses were silent confessions. Inspector Hargrove visited 2 days later, his manor grave. Clennam, he said, has died. Complications from the poison. He never woke again. We sat in silence. A man who waited 30 years to act, Holmes said finally, and died before he could see whether it mattered. And Henry Stannard? Awaiting trial, though I suspect it will be brief. His confession, your evidence, it is a compelling package. Holmes leaned back. He will hang. Yet I saw it in Holmes's eyes. He wished he wouldn't, that somehow justice would find a way to halt the cycle of gallows and graves. Later that evening, Holmes received one final visit. Evelyn Ashbourne. She stood at the threshold of 221B like a wraith dressed in black, a pale note of dignity against the grey London rain. I came, she said, not for answers, but to thank you. Holmes offered her a chair, tea, and silence. I don't know what to believe anymore, she said. Everything in my life feels like a lie. Not everything, Holmes said gently. You loved. That was real. She looked down. Henry wasn't a monster, but he became one. I wonder how much of that was his choice, and how much we forced upon him. No one is born for vengeance, Holmes replied. It is taught, sharpened, and rarely survives contact with love. Evelyn rose. I'm leaving England. I have family in Canada. I think I need to begin again. You carry truth with you now, Holmes said, and a conscience. That's more than most. She smiled faintly. You're not as cold as people say, Mr. Holmes. Only in appearance. When she was gone, I turned to Holmes. It's finished, then? He stared into the fire. No, Watson, it is merely buried. There are others like Stannard, others like Clennam. The courts will forget again, and when they do, the shadows will remember. I leaned forward. And we? We watch the shadows, old friend, until they speak again.